Hello, dear listener. In this video, we will continue to delve into the topic of how parental expectations affect the child and himself, how they can become a support or, on the contrary, a cause of pain and internal conflict. We will consider why some children feel support and grow, while others lose touch with themselves and others. We will try to understand the psychological mechanisms of these processes, as well as find ways to ensure that relationships between generations are built on respect and mutual understanding and not on pressure and disappointment. Stay, and I think you will find useful information for achieving mutual understanding. We often hear, "I do everything for you. You must be better than me. I gave up my dream for you." These words seem filled with love, but behind them, there is often something else. Unfulfilled expectations, projections, and sometimes the weight of disappointment. Often, parents, relying on their own life experience and ideas about what is good and right, expect their children to continue their path, be it profession, life attitudes, or values. However, this is where a deep misunderstanding lies, which can become a source of conflict and rupture. It is important to understand, a child is not a copy of a parent, but a separate individual with a unique set of talents, aspirations, and views on the world. Philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre spoke of freedom as a burden that a person bears when choosing his own path. And it is this freedom of choice that is the key moment in the development of personality. If a child is forced to follow someone else's path, he risks losing himself, becoming locked in a conflict between his desires and the expectations of his parents. Differences in interests and worldviews are not a reason for conflict, but an opportunity for mutual enrichment. Let's remember Carl Jung's idea that each of us has different sides. It is through the clash and dialogue of different views that growth and development are born. A parent who respects and accepts the uniqueness of a child not only supports him, but also opens up to new things, expanding his horizons. Respect becomes the basis of true intimacy. Without it, any communication turns into an argument, an attempt to impose one's will or silent alienation. As psychologist Martin Buber wrote, true dialogue is possible only where people recognize each other as you and not it. When parents accept a child as he is, without expectations and demands, they create a space of trust and freedom, conditions in which love and support grow naturally. Let's turn to the origins and see how various models of behavior were formed and developed. For centuries, thinkers have tried to understand the nature of the relationship between parents and children. After all, this is not just a biological connection. It is a space between freedom and responsibility, love and expectation, tradition and individuality. Confucius, one of the most influential philosophers of the East, argued that piety towards parents is the basis of a harmonious society. In the Confucian model, the family is a hierarchy in which children owe respect, obedience, and loyalty. Parents are the bearers of wisdom and experience. However, even Confucius has an important clarification. A son should not simply obey, he should serve with respect and understanding. This is not blind submission, but a path to mutual respect through internal acceptance of one's role. In the West, views are more dialogical. Seneca wrote that love and virtue must be voluntary. Otherwise, they turn into an obligation that destroys both the giver and receiver. He called on parents to exercise restraint, not to suppress, but to guide. We do not raise copies of ourselves, but souls that are destined to be themselves. Kierkegaard, an existential philosopher, emphasized the importance of an individual path. In his opinion, no person, not even a parent, has the right to impose the meaning of life on another. Being a parent does not mean molding, but accompanying. Sartre, in turn, spoke of freedom as a curse and a blessing for man. Both parent and child are free, and it is this freedom that requires special responsibility. Pressure, manipulation, moral blackmail do not bring closer, but push away. After all, freedom implies choice, and therefore the opportunity to be different, not like you would like. Cultural models of education also vary greatly. In Eastern societies, China, Korea, Japan, collectivism prevails. Family ties are considered a lifelong duty. Shame is an important behavior regulator. The parent is the center of authority. In these cultures, a child often grows up with an inner conviction that he must justify the family's expectations. The Western model, on the contrary, is built on the cult of individualism. Independence and the right to personal freedom, including from a family, are valued here. The parent is not so much a mentor as a partner accompanying the child on the path to self-realization. It is important to understand none of the models is universal. When parents from one paradigm try to raise children who already think in another, a cultural conflict arises. The parent feels that the child is losing values, and the child feels that he is not being heard and is being suppressed. To get out of this contradiction, you need to realize that the philosophy of education is, first of all, a path to mutual recognition. The realization that love is not control, but a space where the other can be themselves. The role of the environment, society, school, relatives. The role of the environment in the formation and perception of parental expectations is often underestimated, although it is one of the key components of this complex process. Parental expectations do not arise in a vacuum. They are fueled and reinforced by external factors, such as social norms, school, relatives, and the cultural context in which the child develops. Social pressure often acts as an amplifier of parental expectations. Society sets standards of success, models of the ideal child and adult, be it a successful scientist, athlete, artist, or just a good person. Parents, feeling this external pressure, can unwittingly raise a bar for their children, striving to meet or exceed the expectations of others. As American psychologist Alfred Adler noted, man is a social creature, and the desire for recognition and belonging often shapes our behavior, including expectations towards loved ones. School and teachers are important agents of influence that set the framework for assessing a child's abilities. Teachers' assessments and comments can reinforce or soften parents' expectations. If a teacher expresses high expectations, parents feel a responsibility to meet them, sometimes increasing the pressure. However, the school can also become a resource for support if its goal is to develop individuality, and not just record success according to formal criteria. Relatives, grandparents, uncles, aunts form a collective family expectation, which is often perceived as an unwritten code. This expectation can be dual. On the one hand, it supports traditions and family values. On the other, it creates pressure and restrictions if it does not coincide with the personal aspirations of the child and parents. Such family standards sometimes cause internal conflicts, since the child finds himself in the center of several expectations, often contradicting each other. Cultural differences in approaches to education and expectations deserve special attention. In Western societies where individualism is valued, parents tend to set goals for the development of personal qualities, independence, and self-expression of the child. In cultures with a collectivist bias, such as in Eastern countries or some traditional families, family pride, maintaining reputation, and adhering to community norms come to the fore. These differences affect what expectations are presented and how the child responds to them. Thus, the role of the environment is a kind of external architecture that shapes and structures the inner world of the family. Understanding this helps parents realize that their expectations are not only the result of personal beliefs, but also a reflection of the social context, and therefore require a wise and flexible approach. It is important to learn to separate your own aspirations from those imposed from the outside in order to create harmonious relationships with your child and support his or her development, taking into account the uniqueness and characteristics of your family. The role of shame and guilt. The role of shame and guilt in relationships between parents and children is one of the most subtle and powerful themes that influence the formation of personality and the future life of a person. Often, the parent's phrase, "I do everything for you," sounds like a call for gratitude and responsibility, but behind it can be hidden a much more complex and heavy emotional burden, a sense of duty, obligation, and even guilt. These are not just words, but a kind of emotional contract that a child absorbs from an early age, sometimes without realizing the depth of its influence. Psychologists distinguish between a healthy sense of responsibility and toxic guilt. Healthy responsibility is a conscious choice, an internal motivation to be useful, to support loved ones, to accept the consequences of one's actions. It gives strength and support, helps to build mature relationships. But when shame and guilt come in their place, especially those imposed from the outside, an emotional trap is formed where a person constantly feels that he is not good enough, that he does not live up to expectations, that he owes someone something without the possibility of choice. Karen Horney, one of the key figures in the psychoanalytic school, noted that the feeling of shame and guilt often becomes a foundation of neurotic states and blocks the development of a healthy personality. It is born not only from external demands, but also from internal conflicts. When a child tries to meet the contradictory expectations of parents, sacrifices his desires for their approval. As a result, this can lead to a chronic feeling of inferiority and self-criticism, which accompanies a person into adulthood. Shame for not living up to expectations is especially destructive. It limits freedom of choice, forms avoidant behavior, and prevents the development of open and trusting relationships. Such adults often experience difficulties in communication, are afraid of mistakes and condemnation, try to please everyone, forgetting about their needs. This creates a vicious circle that requires conscious intervention, be it therapy, working with self-esteem, or an honest conversation with loved ones. It is important to learn to distinguish true care and love from manipulation through guilt. Parents should remember that their words and attitudes shape the child's inner world. And children should remember that they have the right to their desires and mistakes without fear of condemnation. This does not mean a refusal of responsibility, but on the contrary, liberation from toxic scenarios, building mature, harmonious relationships based on respect and acceptance. The problem of misunderstanding between generations. One of the most common and at the same time most painful problems between parents and children is the feeling that we speak the same language, but do not understand each other. Parents hear the child's words, but do not feel the meaning behind them. Children try to express themselves, but run into a wall of misunderstanding. The effect of noisy silence occurs when outwardly everything is calm, but alienation accumulates inside. The origins of this lie deeper than just different views. These are different eras. The parent was formed in one system of values, where stability, obedience, and adherence to established norms were often important. The child grows up in a world where freedom, self-expression, and emotional honesty are valued. Different priorities, different experiences, and as Jung wrote, each generation must outgrow the previous ones, otherwise there will be no movement. The authoritarian approach, where the parent considers himself the only bearer of truth, collides with a new type of thinking, more sensitive, dialogic. A child today does not just want to do as told. He wants to be heard, understood, and recognized as an individual. And here is where the main difficulty arises. There is no translator in the family. There is no space where one could gently explain one's views and also gently listen to the other side. As a result, even good intentions can be perceived as pressure and a desire for freedom as ingratitude. To appreciate differences and build healthy relationships, it is important to 1. Be aware of your expectations and separate them from your child's desires. 2. Learn to listen not only to words, but also to feelings behind them. 3. Support your child's aspirations, even if they do not coincide with yours. 4. Avoid comparisons and judgments. 5. Create an atmosphere of acceptance where the child can be himself without fear of judgment. When there is respect for the individuality of each person in the family, different paths do not destroy, but create a rich mosaic of life in which everyone feels needed and loved. Remember that diversity is a source of strength and inspiration for all generations. Heart-to-heart talk as a method. A heart-to-heart talk is not just an exchange of words. It is a special way to establish deep contact built on trust and respect. It can be difficult to start such a conversation with a parent, especially if the topic concerns expectations that have remained unspoken for years. However, this step can be the first and most important on the path to mutual understanding and improving relations. First of all, it is important to choose the right moment and environment, a place where you both feel calm and will not be distracted. You should start by expressing your feelings, using the iMessages technique proposed by Marshall Rosenberg within the framework of nonviolent communication. For example, instead of accusing, "You always demand too much from me," you can say, "I feel tense when I do not understand what exactly is expected of me." This approach reduces the likelihood of conflict and helps the parent hear you without a defensive reaction. Active listening is the second key element of a heart-to-heart talk. This is when you don't just wait for your turn to speak, but really try to understand what the other person is saying, reflect what you hear in your own words, and clarify details. This creates a sense of safety and importance for both parties. When parents feel listened to and understood, they become more open and willing to share their thoughts and feelings. It is very important to avoid an accusatory tone and not to attribute intentions. Instead of "you never support me," it is better to say, "Sometimes I feel that my successes go unnoticed and this upsets me." This language helps to convey your feelings without escalating conflict. Psychologist Carl Rogers emphasized that sincerity and empathy are the fundamental foundations of healthy communication. Marshall Rosenberg's approach expands on this understanding, offering practical tools that allow you to speak and listen in a way that breaks through the wall of mutual misunderstandings. For many families, a heart-to-heart talk is a fresh start, when you can release the burden of unspoken expectations and begin to build a relationship anew, based on respect and acceptance. This is not an instant process, but a path that requires patience and practice. But the first steps can dramatically change the atmosphere in the home. If you want to start such a conversation, try 1. Prepare. Think about what exactly you want to say and how you feel. 2. Start with iMessages. Talk about your experiences, not about the actions of the other person. 3. Listen carefully and without interrupting. Try to understand, not refute. 4. Avoid accusations and generalizations. Focus on specific situations and your feelings. 5. Be prepared for pauses and silence. This is also part of the understanding process. Remember that sincere and respectful conversation is a key to ensuring that expectations stop being a heavy burden and become a bridge to mutual understanding and support. Point of choice: adult child and his path. The point of choice is that critical moment when an adult child realizes that he or she has not lived his or her own life. This realization often comes not suddenly, but gradually, through internal discomfort, a feeling of emptiness, or an internal conflict between one's own desires and imposed expectations. Reassessment of values becomes a transitional crisis, a moment when old guidelines collapse, but new ones have not yet been built. This crisis is often frightening, causes anxiety and doubt, but at the same time opens up space for growth. It is during this period that it is important to find support within yourself. Learn to trust your feelings and take responsibility for your choice. As Socrates wrote, "Know thyself is not just wisdom, but a vital necessity." How mature and free a person will become depends on this step. Adult independence is not a break with parents, but a change in the format of relationships. This is a transition from control to cooperation, from demands to respect and understanding. Parents and children begin to see each other not through the prism of roles and expectations, but as individuals with unique experiences and feelings. This is a new dialogue, where everyone is given freedom and space to develop. This transition requires patience and mutual respect, but opens a way to true intimacy and support. Solutions for both sides. For parents, the first and most important thing is to learn to listen for real. This is not just hearing words, but trying to understand the feelings and thought behind them. As Carl Rogers, the great humanist psychologist, said, the most important thing in communication is to be heard. Listening with an open heart and without judgment means creating a space where a child can be sincere and vulnerable. At the same time, it is important to learn to speak without imposition and control, to share your experiences, but without pressure, giving the child a right to their own decisions and mistakes. Parents should remember that a child's adult life is his or her personal path, and support is more important than attempts to direct or correct. It is important for children to set their boundaries clearly and respectfully. Often we are afraid of hurting our parents or causing a conflict, so we remain silent or give in, accumulating grievances. But healthy relationships are impossible without honesty and open expression of your needs. Saying no is not a sign of harshness, but rather caring for yourself and the quality of the connection. An adult child should strive for a dialogue where both parties hear and take each other into account. This is the process of building new relationships based on mutual respect, not on childish roles. Shared practices are an important bridge that strengthens a connection. Regular family conversations without rushing or judging help keep the communication channel open. Shared memories and shared activities, be it walks, trips, or just having tea, create new positive experiences that glue relationships together and fill them with meaning. Shared goals, even small ones, can unite and inspire, shifting attention from conflicts to creation. These practical steps are not a universal formula, but a basis for starting the path to harmony. It is important to take small steps, notice successes, and learn from mistakes in order to create a space of trust and love together. So, we have to consider how important it is for parents and children to understand each other, to see feelings and fears behind words, to respect each other's path. Remember that relationships are not a competition, but a joint journey. Do not be afraid to take a step forward, listen and speak openly. After all, it is through dialogue that true mutual understanding and closeness are born. Share in the comments what understanding the family means to you. What difficulties do you encounter, and how do you overcome them? Your experience is important. Together we learn and grow. Thank you for being with us today. Until next time,